The best signal for us is if a biotech company can talk plasmids all the way to pallets in the same conversation.
Hey, Carl, how's it going?
Happy New Year, Erin. This is the first recording of the year for the Grow Everything podcast, where we explore the world of biology as technology. How are things going with you?
Things are going great. We're kicking off the year with so many good things. I mean, first, we want to give a shout out to our friends that are at the JP Morgan conference. I saw my LinkedIn was blowing up with everyone like, are you at the JP Morgan conference? Are you? And a lot of our friends are there. Want to give a shout out to some people?
Sure. I mean, John Cumbers and Yvonne Jobert of SynBioBeta are both attending, but there's a ton of people we know who are attending. Nick Edwards of Potato is going to be there. So hopefully some of you people will all get together.
It's very intense to have a conference right at the beginning of the year. So hopefully everyone makes their contacts, gets their press releases out in time, and does all their follow-up. They have lots of follow-up after going to a conference.
Yeah, there's a lot. Exactly.
Yep.
Erin, you traveled around the world over the holidays. You went to South Africa, which I find to be fascinating. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your trip? What you do? Why were you there? You've been there before.
Yes. So I went to celebrate a friend's 5-year anniversary. They were married when it was COVID, so they didn't really have a big celebration. 5 years later, here we are. Things are safe enough to travel. And so we went there, we had a lot of celebrations, and then we just explored. South Africa is so beautiful. It's rich in diversity. I'm talking about biodiversity. I'm talking about people. I'm talking about climate. There's very lush. There's a lot of trees, beautiful gardens. You can experience 4 climates in one day. So it'd be like a little bit of rain, cold, hot. It's summer there when it's winter here. There's mountains and beaches and forests. It's so beautiful. And you can just drive around and just be in awe of what's around you. There's vineyards, so they have this area called the winelands. It reminds me a lot of Northern California, but more dynamic and intense. So I was just blown away. And the food's very delicious. They have, in South Africa, they have the Cape Malay people, which are the most genetically diverse people. They have ancestry from Africa, Asia, Europe. And so not only their genetics, but their cultures combine and create very interesting foods. And it's not like, when you go to Southeast Asia, if you have like Malaysian food or Indian food, there's like a lot of spice. It kind of did a good job of keeping the flavors in check. But I will say that there's this one like spice trader, it's called Atlas. And they have these spice mixtures and they call them the father-in-law and the mother-in-law. And the mother-in-law is super spicy. It's actually not super spicy for my spice. And I know you like spicy food, Carl. So it's not that bad. And
to a point.
To a point. It doesn't reach that point. So again, still very friendly. I'll have to make something for you so you can try it.
I'd like to compare the mother-in-law to the father-in-law.
Yeah. The father-in-law is supposed to be more mild, calm.
That's so funny.
And the mother-in-law is like spicy in your face.
When we were talking about this last week, when you'd come back, you said it was like 4x Northern California, it's like 4 times, it's like if you're Northern California, but more intense. And I remember last year I had visited the Botanic Gardens in Ventura where I grew up, and they have this huge collection of South African plants. It's also Chilean plants. So I think if you want to get a taste of South Africa without going all the way there, you could get a taste of it at the Ventura Botanic Gardens. But I find it fascinating. I'm super jealous. I had a little bit of FOMO while you were gone, and I just can't, it's like hard for me to picture it. I know what vineyards look like. I know what some of those beaches look like because I've looked them up. It just sounds like a great trip.
Yeah. I'll have to send you all the pictures. I think I need to level up on my storage on my iPhone because I took so many pictures and videos. I know we've been busy as soon as we came back. We hit the ground running, so we haven't had time to debrief. Anytime I travel, I always go and look at what's biotech happening here? What are the bio products that we can observe and what's new and fresh? So there's a couple things. One is that I was, sitting in a hotel, poolside, enjoying a little drink. I had to set that one up. And I got a drink that had a straw, and the straw was very interesting. And actually, I saved it. It's this straw here. It's by a company called Vero, and it's made from sugarcane.
Wow.
So, straw alternatives have been very up and down from my experience. I mean, the paper straws, You know what I mean?
Yeah, they fall apart.
They fall apart. Like, and I may like bite into paper, which I don't do often, but like just that feeling is just icky for me.
Yeah.
It's like equivalent of scratching a chalkboard for me.
Yeah.
But this sugarcane straw is very durable. It's, you know, you can hear it. I mean, like I drank a cold drink through here. I did the chew test. Like I kept on chewing it because I know some people have that and it's still solid, you know, like you can take a look
Wow.
at that. So, I mean, this is like a very great straw. And again, the company's called Vera. I'll put that in the show notes. But I was like, hey, cool. I don't know if they're based out of South Africa, but it was there.
That's cool.
Yep. And then there's another company. I didn't get to like see them, but I did go to pharmacies where they keep all of their amazing skincare products. And there's a company called Sabona Mycelium, and they make fermentation-derived beta-glucan skincare. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, so like growth factors, different things that can really amplify your skin. I have to go back and read about all of the different claims that they have, but I will put that in the show notes too. But it was cool to see that there's a company in South Africa looking at fermentation and using mycelium as their main microbe to create products. And so I was looking at different sunscreen there, and they have sunscreen that they import. And there was one it's called Helio. It's by a company called Cantabria Labs. They call themselves a pharma company, but of course, there's that blend of companies that are making pharma products, but can also come into the world of consumer. And they make it from a plant extract, and it's a unique plant. The plant is a tropical fern called Polypodium leucotomos. I probably pronounced that incorrectly, but it's found in Central America. I, of course, was thinking, okay, it's a plant extract. Like, where do they find these plants? How does it, you know, how much do they have to grow? I mean, this is an ingredient sunscreen, so I don't know how much of it has to be put into one bottle. But like, could it be made through fermentation? Something that's been crossing my mind. But Cantabria Labs, they're based in Spain.
And it says the fern block, which is what you're talking about, is their hero ingredient. And a disruptive innovation. We'll have to look into these guys. But yeah, they're based in Madrid. The Cantabrian Sea is north of northern Spain. So it makes sense.
Always on the lookout for new biotech products across the world into my travels. So we'll keep our eyes peeled.
Yeah, and we've met some innovators from South Africa working with biotech at SymBioBeta. Like 3 or 4 years ago, there was a contingent, even like the Minister of Science was at SymBioBeta. So shout out to all of you guys if you happen to be listening. We're always excited to hear what is going on in biotech in different parts of the world. And seeing it firsthand is always, you know, there's nothing beats that.
Yes, absolutely. And then while I was gone, I mean, there was a lot of big news happening in the world of tech. You want to share something with us?
Sure. I mean, the big kind of announcement in the last couple of weeks was that Andreessen Horowitz, a big venture capital fund, Silicon Valley based, raised a $15 billion fund for the next decade. And we'll link to this in the show notes. And that $15 billion really makes A16Z a mega fund, not just defining the future, but maybe even dominating the future. I ended up reading kind of analysis and history of A16Z over the weekend by Packy McCormick in his Not Boring newsletter, and we'll put a link into that. And he really discusses what the deployment of that amount of capital means. Really impressed by what A16 has done, particularly on the tech side. It might be interesting to do a deeper dive to see how successful they've been on biotech. And I think probably most of their investments in biotech have been on the biopharma side. Our friends at Asimov are funded by A16, among others. And A16 was a big, supporter of them from the very beginning. Jorge Conde and Vijay Pandey, I think, are the two heads of the biotech or life science division of A16Z. So congratulations to A16Z. I think it's like a huge, big piece of news, particularly for those of us who are paying attention to who's funding the future and what are they doing with it.
Yeah, that is a lot of money. I mean, I'd be curious to know how much of that will be going to biotech across not only healthcare, but also to everything we talk about here when it comes to growing everything, all the different products and materials and ingredients. So that'd be really interesting. I'm so curious to know about their check size, who the LPs are, all of that. A deeper dive would be interesting, especially as we learn how they invest in biotech.
Yeah. And then the other piece of news, I think this just came out last week, was the new food pyramid. I don't know if you saw this, Iram, but there's been a lot of talk about food and making America healthy. And the new food pyramid basically puts meat and butter up on the top. It talks about eating less sugar, fewer processed foods. It actually ditches the limits on alcohol. And here we are, dry January, and this food pyramid, I think, says drinking is okay. I need to dig into it a little bit more deeply. But the document is citation free. And since it's coming from our, anti-vax Robert Kennedy Jr., I think it's something that we should be looking at. Of course, we all want to eat healthier. I'm not sure that the food pyramid is something that a lot of people follow, but I thought it was interesting.
Oh my goodness, Carl. I leave for just 2 weeks and this comes out. And of course, there's a lot going on in the world and we're not necessarily a news takedown podcast, but this is just insane. There is a clear problem with people that have high cholesterol, high blood pressure, obesity runs rampant in the United States, and it's starting to as more countries adopt Western cultures. And we're seeing it in India, we're seeing it in different places. This food pyramid is also upside down.
That's weird.
It's so
yeah,
they have
very weird.
So I don't know what that means. And I see it now and it has whole grains in the bottom and you're like, what?
But the whole grain things is kind of interesting because I think one of the criticisms of this food pyramid is that RFK Jr. has been surrounded by meat industry executives. And one of the criticisms of the previous food pyramid was that it was designed by grain industry executives. So you got to look into this and take it with a grain of salt.
No pun intended. Grains. Oh, man. But the last pyramid has fruits and vegetables at the bottom. So even if big grain, big carb wanted to promote more of their products, it didn't put it on the bottom, right?
Right.
It wasn't you must have grains, right? They still kind of put it up. But to put, red meat up top is hopefully people get it, right? They're all right, they're just trying to promote it. But my concern is if there's a campaign to replace this in schools, that's when it gets crazy, right?
Yeah.
So if it's hey, we're just playing around and we're just going to put this out there and let's see how the public responds to it. Okay. All right. I'm down to see, let's listen. But if they're nope, this is what we're teaching. Yeah. This is what we're teaching. This is part of the curriculum. This is truth. Then we start getting a little bit in trouble.
Yeah. In this article that I will link to in Ars Technica's, they noted something that was conspicuously missing was the recommendations to limit alcohol consumption. Previously, the guideline was, no more than 2 drinks a day for men, 1 drink for women. And this guidance is really just drink less. And apparently when there was a press briefing, a reporter asked Dr. Oz, who is administrator at the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services about this. He said, well, alcohol is a social lubricant that brings people together. He didn't address the health issues associated with alcohol. It's kind of nutty, and I don't know what else to say about it, except for, Iram, you left. There's a new food pyramid.
Oh my goodness. This whole food pyramid misses highly processed food. It doesn't say where that lands in here, and it doesn't have things like coffee or anything it mentions alcohol, but other drinks. And then I'm thinking about food, and in this world of GLP-1, what does a GLP-1 food pyramid look like? Is it similar, just smaller?
Yeah.
That'd be really interesting to see.
Yeah. You got to see the graphic because it's got, meats and dairy and chicken and vegetables and fruit up on top. And then it's got whole grains on the bottom. It's just kind of funky looking. It's an upside down pyramid.
I feel like we are in the upside down, speaking of which. But yeah, and I mentioned coffee. I did want to say something really quick too about that. On my travels to South Africa, we had a pit stop in Ethiopia, which is where coffee originated. According to them, there's a lot of big Ethiopian coffee, might have been just playing commercials and just owning coffee. But that is the coffee that we drink in my household. It's a nice light-bodied coffee. But I bring it up because when I was on the plane and we took Ethiopian Airlines, they had commercials before you watched any movie or anything on the screen. And there was this whole like invest in Ethiopia, invest in Africa commercial, and specifically pointing out agro-processing and agribusiness. And I was like, okay, this is very interesting. And they had like all this video footage of people processing the coffee beans, chocolate beans, other types of grains. And I was like, okay, this is interesting, because when I think of agro-processing in the context of what we talk about here at Grow Everything, you know, it could be like a feedstock for a lot of fermentation processes. And that is the topic of today's episode.
Right. So today we're going to be interviewing Erin Marasco of Cargill, which we're super excited about. Cargill, if you don't know it, is one of the US's largest privately held multinationals, and they operate in food, agriculture, finance, and industrial. They connect farmers to markets, provide essential products like grains, oils, meat, animal nutrition. And their mission is to nourish the world in a safe and responsible and sustainable way. I have met Erin at SynBioBeta, but you had her on a panel. So why don't you talk a little bit about your experience with Erin before we get into the podcast?
I had the privilege of moderating a panel where Erin was present. We also had P&G and two biotech innovators, which I'll talk more about later. I had mentioned before in the podcast. But so Dr. Erin Marasco is a Distinguished Research and Development Senior Director at Cargill. So she leads their global biology group. And with her background in biotech, Erin and her team are at the forefront of innovation in ingredient discovery, strain development, enzyme applications, and metagenomic and microbiome research. So she's doing it all. And this is why when we talk to other people that work in CPG and that work with Cargill, they're like, oh, I know Erin. I know Erin. Everyone we talk to people at Coca-Cola, we talk to people at Reckitt, all these other people, and they know Erin because she's looking across the spectrum of biotech innovation and how fundamentally, when you're looking at it from agribusiness, how does it transcend from the origination of a feedstock all the way to a product. And so she leads this team at Cargill. She's at the forefront. She really is also very passionate about science communications, and she's always out there really trying to bring people around this idea of using biology to grow everything. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce this episode with Erin Marasco of Cargill. Erin Marasco, welcome to the Grow Everything podcast. We're so excited to have you on our first episode of the year to kick off our CPG series. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes.
I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited you're here because Cargill is a ginormous company that's doing so many things. It sits at the center of global food, agriculture, and materials. But we want to know, where is biotech creating the most real leverage right now?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me here on the podcast. And thanks for letting me share a little bit about Cargill's story and our perspectives on biomanufacturing and how it fits into food supply chains, material supply chains, animal nutrition, and the rest. Where we see biotechnology as having a real opportunity is leveraging it wherever biology can give us performance advantages in terms of carbon intensity. So that means chemicals, foods, bioactives. So in the bioindustrial space, we recently launched our BDO product, which is a drop-in for polymers.
Hey guys, quick translation. Erin mentioned BDO. That's short for 1,4-butanediol, a basic chemical building block used to make a ton of everyday materials. It shows up in things like plastics, polyurethanes, and stretchy fibers. Yes, I'm talking about yoga pants. Traditionally, BDO is made from fossil fuels, but here's the shift. You can make it through fermentation instead. Same molecule, but different, more sustainable origin story.
We've been producing for over 18 years lactic acid, which is used a lot in biorecyclable plastics such as PLA. And in ethanol, we also have a position, right? So thinking about fuels, we have a small position in ethanol, but it just really shows how biotech can help scale energy solutions. In the food space, probably our most discussed solution is around sugar reduction. There we have two fermentation-based products. One is Eversweet, which is a high-intensity, high-potency sweetener that is based on stevia glycosides, which are found in plants. And then the other is erythritol. And they're both fascinating because they're fermentation products, but they come from different styles of fermentation and different origins. And then finally, if course, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about citric acid, right? That's like the one of the most primary oldest staples in our food systems, and it's something that microorganisms naturally want to produce. Where we're starting to get more and more traction and interest is in that health space and in the bioactive space. And one of those products where Cargill has a product on the market today is a postbiotic called Epicor. And so that's really about immunity and wellness innovation. And so I gave you a number of examples right off the bat to show that biomanufacturing for Cargill isn't a future concept. It's real products in global supply chains that we're producing today at scale.
And it's something you guys have been doing for a while, right?
Yeah. We trace our biomanufacturing roots back at least 30 years, right? And we really do anchor on citric acid being one of our first primary fermentation products to go to market.
All right. So, what's so interesting about this is recently you guys published this piece on demystifying fermentation. So, we have a couple of questions about fermentation. Why do you think it's important right now to ground the biotech conversation in fundamentals? Because fermentation is really the most fundamental of all biotechnology.
First of all, the article is wonderful. It was put together with a collaboration across a large number of different people within Cargill. And the reason why we wrote it is we didn't write it for the techies, right? We wrote it for the people who are the recipients or the users of the technology. So the food application scientists at CPG companies who are curious but need to understand a little bit more before they're comfortable using these types of ingredients. And the message that we want to tell them is that fermentation is powerful. It's technically complex, but it is one of the oldest technologies that are out there. And so if we can understand and utilize some of these natural processes to our own ends through an understanding of the science, there's a lot of opportunity and benefit there.
That's a really great piece. It's called Fermentations, Nature's Original Biotech. So yes, we will have that in the show notes. But like you mentioned, fermentation has been around for a long time. So why does it suddenly feel new again? What has changed in the past few years?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, thousands of years we've been using it for beer, bread, yogurt. I would think that there's a couple of trends that have really made it more socially aware. The first one is from the technology side, the toolkits have changed, right? We have a lot more advances in strain engineering. So the ability to do strain engineering is now much more cost effective. The precision that's available in strain engineering has increased. And think about technologies like sequencing, which are now routine, right? In 2010, we had a non-canonical microorganism that we were trying to domesticate, right? So take something that had a unique purpose and then trying to make it viable so that we could engineer it and use it for commercial purposes. We needed to sequence that. That was kind of groundbreaking at that time, right? There was no sequence available for that. Today, it would be something that an associate scientist in my lab would do, right? So the amount of sequence information that we have has just made the innovation space so much more fruitful and available to us. We can look at interesting rare molecules that are out there, and because of the sequence information, be able to trace back the metabolic routes to produce them. So now we understand the recipe to make these types of products. In addition to strain engineering, I think that there's been a lot more emphasis and interest in things like our microbiome, our gut microbiome, and how the interaction of molecules and bigger systems work together. Kind of that systems biology trend that was available in the early 2000s, I think that really caused a lot of interest in fermentation. Because we know the microorganisms in our gut are useful. We know that the microorganisms interacting on raw materials are producing useful products. And people are like, how do these systems work together? And then I would be remiss if I didn't, represent the more technical side of fermentation and talk about like manufacturing controls and scale up and how much the advances have been there in terms of characterizing and controlling large scale fermentations. So think about your monitoring systems, like looking at aeration, looking at pH and things like that. So those process controls and manufacturing discipline are making scaling up more viable.
Yeah, I mean, fermentation is the oldest technology, right? I think people say that civilization began when we learned how to ferment things. But on the end, and it continues to evolve, which is so fascinating to me. But talking about it today, I think we would also be remiss if we weren't talking about startups as well, because a lot of startups are creating the innovations. And Cargill partners with a lot of startups. So why don't we talk a little bit about how does Cargill think about partnering with startups versus building things or a technology internally?
Cargill is very interested and engaged in partnerships and looking broadly across the biotech ecosystem. The main reason why is because partnerships give us more shots on goal and a speed that internal development and acquisition alone can't match. Right. So Cargill prides itself on our scale and our expertise, but we are limited in the number of people that we can dedicate to early stage innovation. If you look at our global footprint, we're involved in so many different spaces, everything from animal nutrition to specialty nutrition to proteins and bulk caloric starches. And so to be able to do innovation across all of those spaces would be impossible with our employee footprint. So startups can bring speed and fresh ideas. And then we partner with them, bringing some of that manufacturing discipline, supply chain reach, customer trust, and just experiences. Collaborating early on allows us to create proof points, to share risk, and really just start to establish new products in the marketplace. It's kind of taking that entrepreneurial agility that the startups are really known for and pairing it with our operational excellence so that these promising ideas can kind of move from the lab into the marketplace.
Yeah, that's great. We do have a lot of founders and innovators that listen to the podcast, and they would love to work with companies like Cargill. But what is the biggest misconception that you think these innovators or founders have about working with a company like Cargill in terms of its size and scope?
Yeah, I think what I have seen the biggest misconception to be is that big equals easy access to unlimited dollars and free assets, right? And so
Right.
people approach us and they're like, well, you have this biorefinery campus in Blair, Nebraska with all of these fermentation tanks and millions of gallons of fermentation assets. Let's go. But in reality, right, to run effectively as a business, all of our resources are tied to performance, compliance, and customer commitments. It's a failure on our part if we have idled assets, right? So often it's about finding the right products that would have to displace an existing product because it's more valuable. The other factor is that scale really brings about complexity, right? At Cargill, for the size that we are, we take our responsibility in the world very seriously, right? I mean, if you think about our mission, right, to nourish the world, that means more than just food and people. It means the environment. It means everything. So we really have to take seriously our responsibility to food safety, regulatory requirements, global supply chains. And so it makes it hard to just flip a switch, right? A startup would look at us and say, we're slow. And it's really important that founders and partnerships understand that cost structures, timelines, and shared risks are something that we want to talk about and assess really early on. And that's kind of how we move from great idea to a viable product.
Yeah, it's not just, hey, we've got this great thing, turn on the bioreactors for us.
Right, right. We have assessed IP in the past, right? And when you assess IP, then the lawyer will say, well, how would our ocean transport business feel about this? But that's the scope of Cargill, right?
Yeah.
We are a large multinational entity in many different categories and marketplaces. And when we look at interacting with anybody, we have to think about the holistic part. And so it causes a lot more assessment and caution. It doesn't mean that we don't do things, we do, but we are very responsible to our guiding principles, and that leads to conversations.
Yeah. So what I'm getting from you is, one, you are open and willing to partner, but partners need to really do their homework to understand how it has a bigger impact on the company.
Yeah, exactly. I do want to give another point out there, and this is not all startups and this is not all founders, but it is a phenomenon that I have seen. And there's a myth sometimes that big company scientists aren't innovative or creative. And when I think about my team, I think my talent could sit on a bench in any company and anywhere around the globe and be creating these innovative, unique solutions. And so just because our scientists are maybe one of many, many, many employees, it doesn't really diminish their scientific prowess or their technical capabilities. It's just that the solutions that we're working on internally within Cargill have to compete against a vast array of other internal ideas before they leave the doors of the lab.
I'm really glad that you said that because I have heard founders say things like that.
Yeah.
And that's a great perspective because there's a lot of opportunity to innovate, but you have a strategy that you need to align on and you have to get the work done versus the spaghetti on the wall shotgun approach, and how does that going to land, especially when it comes to the bottom line. But I really appreciated that you were very candid about that.
I think also when we talk about innovation, right? Sometimes I mean, your analogy of spaghetti on the wall, right? Sometimes it's like fun to just try everything. I think when you're a scientist in a company like Cargill and in the end you're going to own the manufacturing, it brings a little bit of constraint and discipline all the way to the beginning. Because we're not going to try post strains and we're not going to try schemes that would not eventually be commercially viable. Like we may think about them, we may talk about them, haha, in a meeting or over coffee. But if we know that it would not be financially viable, we kind of take those out of our research plans and just have them as conversation points or what ifs.
I want to ask you about product readiness, but I was hoping you would step back, Erin, and describe, what is your role? Like, tell us how you fit into the organization.
Yeah, so I have, I think, one of the best jobs in the world. So I have a PhD, and my PhD was about strain engineering. And I now lead a group of scientists who create microorganisms that produce useful products. So my team is made up of chemical engineers, food microbiologists, metabolic engineers, all sorts of different biology-based scientific disciplines. And we do a lot of fermentation strain engineering. So think about design, modifications of microorganisms, and producing products out of those, as well as enzyme discovery and enzyme applications. And then I have a team, especially my team in Europe, is really focused on food microbiology. So the microorganisms that are commonly found in our food, how do we use them on raw materials to either change the texture or the flavor, the nutritional profile without any type of genetic modification or engineering. And then, of course, we partner very closely with our fermentation colleagues in moving through to develop fermentation processes that can be scaled. So I lead this team, which means that I give some people in career advice, but then I also work strategically across Cargill with our different product lines and enterprises to look at what are possible targets and how could biology unlock those targets for the organization. I like my role because I have an awareness of what's going on in the animal nutrition space, as well as bioindustrial spaces and food. And what I'm looking at is how does our technology unlock things for those businesses? And then the businesses are coming to me and my group saying, here's what we're trying to do. How can your science help us? And so it's that meeting of the minds where expertise meets expertise and we collaborate.
Yeah, I love that. So going back to like what we were talking about earlier when it comes to startups, and I really appreciate the context. When is a startup ready? Like, what does product readiness mean to Cargill when you're evaluating a potential biotech partner?
I think there's no one answer to that. I want to be really clear. And so it's a little bit less about readiness and more about what expectations does that startup have of Cargill. We have startups talk to us at every single stage of their journey, but how we interact and we invest with them will differ wildly. When we start to talk about serious financial support, we definitely want to see some proof, right? We will probably ask you for some of that molecule to test in our application spaces, certain quantities of it. We will want to understand really well your techno-economic assessment, your timelines, your milestones, where do you want to go and how do you want to scale?
Erin just said something that founders hear a lot: a techno-economic assessment, or a TEA. A TEA is where biology meets the spreadsheet. It looks at costs, inputs, and what happens when you try to scale. You can have beautiful science, but if the economics don't work at industrial scale, it's not considered a product yet. It's still a research project.
Companies that are very, very early stage, Cargill Ventures may be wanting to talk with them at just like we're starting out phase, like pre-Series A, Series A type of conversation. And then much further along, if there are gaps in our portfolio that we know we directly need to go out and obtain, that's a much more accelerated and targeted conversation. So it's hard to describe with one answer, Carl, because it's a spectrum. I would say, just with respect to your listeners, if somebody's like, oh, that doesn't help me, I don't know how to approach Cargill anymore, right?
Right.
I think it comes down to understanding what you are making as a company, why you are making it, right? Who are your customers? what do you think Cargill can do for you? Like, why would we be valuable to you? How is it a partnership and not just transactional? And then understanding very well where your business is going and where you don't want it to go. At least that structures a nice starting conversation.
Yeah, yeah. That's, I think, very helpful because just like Carl mentioned earlier, like when a partner wants to approach Cargill, they need to do their homework and really visualize how they fit and
Yeah.
ask questions. I think when I was a startup founder, I would just blab, blab, blab on about my idea, my product, my company, and just hope that the partner or the client that I was going after would just put the pieces together and tell me what to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was definitely the wrong way to do it. But I think your guidance here is very helpful because you did really do a good job of laying out a framework and how to get into Cargill shoes a bit, or even any large company, right? Just think a little bit more about how they work and how you fit in and what's the specific ask that you have. Is it just money? No, that can't
Right,
be it.
right. The best signal for us is if a biotech company can talk plasmids all the way to pallets in the same conversation, right? Going from
Whoa, plasmids to
Plasmids?
pallets. That's the name. That's the name of the title of this episode.
Yeah, plasmids to pallets. I love it.
if you could show an understanding of the supply chain and not just the science, right? How are you approaching your economics and your execution? It's really helpful, right?
Mhm.
And we know, and companies know, right? The TEAs, they're not static. They change over time. They evolve as processes optimize. And if you, as a startup, can understand that, it shows that you have a sense of maturity, right? It's not just the fermentation tanks that make biotech products successful. It's logistics, it's quality systems, it's customer acquisition, even customer service. So we have to be able to talk about the plasmids to pallets in the same breath.
Yeah, yeah. And how is it going to be lucrative or helpful to Cargill? What is the value proposition there too? Not just for
Yeah.
the innovator, but for
Yeah.
everyone. How's everyone going to rise
Yes. How do
together?
we value share across that
Yeah.
supply chain? And often it's not just a startup in Cargill in that supply chain, right? It's going to be the CPG company who's receiving it in the next step. And, right? There's many, many people in the supply chain.
I would like to know, if you could share, what are some examples of successful partnerships that Cargill has entered into, and how did that work? If you can share a couple that are public.
Yeah, selfishly, I'm going to talk about my favorite example because I was there from the napkin conversation at the dinner. I want to talk about Avancia, which is a joint venture between DSM Firmenich and Cargill to
Okay.
produce Eversweet. And so, as you know, sugar reduction, it's a big ask from consumers and from customers. The amount of sweet that people want to have in their diet is consistent or growing, but everybody talks about limiting sugars in their diet, right? And then
Mhm.
there has been interest from consumers to have sugar replacements that are from nature, right? So stevia is for thousands of years, it's been used in teas and in other ways to sweeten. In the stevia leaf itself, there's like 72 different molecules that contribute to that sweet profile. And over time, scientists have discovered which of those are the sweetest molecules. Cargill was exploring with a startup known as Evolva. We were looking
Oh,
at
yeah.
what are the sweetest molecules in a stevia leaf. Cargill had already had a position in the leaf business, but we knew that Reb A has its place, but some consumers would prefer Reb M and Reb D because of their taste profiles, more roundedness, less bitterness. And so, working with Evolvo, we looked at biotech solutions and decided that a fermentation approach was the right approach. After a number of years of working with Evolva, we had technology that was poised and ready to commercialize. And we went through the process of piloting and obtaining a no objection letter from the US FDA. In a similar path, DSM, they could read the same trends in the food space as we could. And they also have fantastic biotechnology capabilities. And so they were developing stevia glycoside solutions. And then it came to a point where we realized that we would be better together. The fastest route to supplying consumers with what they need would be to form this joint venture. And so we looked at what different opportunities each company brought. And in the first meeting, we kind of mapped it out. And then Strangely enough, when the joint venture was finalized, it was pretty similar to those initial conversations. But we just looked at the different phases of the project and who would lead and who would follow or support in those different phases of the project. And then we quickly, within 2 years, had the Blair facility where we produce Eversweet today up and running and shipping and working with customers. And so that was a very successful partnership. And it's an interesting example, I think, for this because Cargill started with a different partner, but then as relationships changed, that one didn't work out. But the molecule was still compelling enough to form new partnerships.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. That's a great example. We had a former CEO of Evolva on the podcast,
Oh,
Murali Murthaswamy. I don't know if you know Murali. And the way that I've understand Evolva was that they were like a pre-Ginkgo, similar in terms of strain engineering, bringing new innovation when it comes to
yes.
biotech to the market. So that's a great example. Thank you for sharing that.
I can share some examples in the bioindustrial space. And it's kind of an inversion, this story. So there was a company called BioAmber, and BioAmber was really interested in bringing biosuccinic to the market. And in the early part of the podcast, I referenced that we had a proprietary microorganism that Cargill worked on and developed tools to engineer and to bring to market. This microorganism is valuable in low pH settings. And so we actually partnered with BioAmber to be their organism supplier. And so we did
Oh,
some strain development work for them in the biosuccinic space that then they took to market and commercialized the end product. And so that was a very nice relationship in that case too, because it was really looking at who has the right expertise and capability, and then who's going to drive it forward into that market development. Our latest collaboration story is around Kira, which is a core is the company, Kira is the product, and it's around BDO. And there's a partnership between Cargill and Helm on the product side, but some of that technology is a partnership with Genomatic.
okay, I see. Because Genomatica, they also had partnerships with Lululemon or some
Mhm.
athleisure companies.
That's
So
correct.
because you guys are very like foundational. Cargill's very foundational when it comes to, I want to talk about feedstock soon, but then obviously your bioprocessing, and then you help really create the core products, the core ingredients to make everything that we use. So this is why you're the perfect person to speak with at the
Yeah.
start of this CPG series.
It kind of really struck home to me recently because we were preparing to talk with a customer and we took a floor print of a typical store and we said, how many biotech products would be per aisle, right? And we started to
Mm.
walk up and down the aisles virtually, looking at a floor print.
Yeah.
And it was like almost every aisle has some level of a biotech product in it. And then if we take it away from biomanufacturing and just look at Cargill's influence, like almost every aisle has a Cargill in it. But it was a little bit awe-inspiring. I was like, okay, wow, if I feel frustrated at work someday, I need to like take a step back and realize the impact that people at my work can have in the global supply chains. It's amazing.
Yeah, that is
You could just
amazing.
take a stroll in one of those big stores and be like, "Yep, have an influence in that. Yep, I have an influence in that."
Yeah.
And you're like, "Okay, I have a lot of work to do."
That's exactly right. It's a mandate of like, wow, and there's so much more work to do and so much more we can improve, right? So that it is
Yes.
more
Yeah.
accessible to more products.
I think that kind of leads into this next question. You're talking about biology touching everything, and it's what we talk about in this podcast as well. But how has Cargill's approach to innovation changed as biology moves from kind of niche products into infrastructure?
It's an interesting question because for us, I would say like our roots are a commodity company. And when we think about the way that we produce products through biomanufacturing, there's nothing niche about it, right? We're at millions and millions of gallons of fermentation capacity and hundreds of metric tons. Our conversations internally can be a little bit more about how do we accept producing smaller quantities, higher value products instead of the tons are us type of approach, right? So that's a sensitivity that we have internally. I think if I take your question a little bit differently and think about infrastructure and footprint and how critical it is to success, I would say that over the last 30 years and $2 billion of investment, we recognize that the assets really drive the output of the innovation. In my lab, if I come up with 30 ideas, I'm not going to be able to commercialize 30 ideas because we can't spend, 30 ideas times a couple hundred million for each one to be successful. So we really need to look at what are the right metrics of success. Is the right metric of success bringing something that is found in low purity, bringing it, or something that's found in very small quantities, but being able to unlock it and make it accessible because we can get higher purity through fermentation, right? So it's an unlock, it's a new product that nobody has ever gotten. Or is it like really releasing ourselves from petroleum feedstocks? Is it now we're making something in a way that has better carbon intensity scores? And that's the motivating factor. And that's compelling because customers want that sustainability in their supply chain. Or is it really about supply chain security? Like there's something that we need and we're dependent on, but if we can't continue to produce it because of a fire or some type of flooding or something that disrupts our agricultural systems, but we still need this product, is that a motivation to do that? And when you start to look at those rationales for why you would make something through fermentation or biomanufacturing, then you score them against each other. But not all of the products are going to make it to market, and we're going to have to make those types of market-based choices. And products will fit that differently, right? So if you think about some of the stuff that's going into the beauty space, a lot about that is enrichment, right? We know these products are good for us, but we can't harvest enough plants to get them because they're found in really small quantities. So biomanufacturing unlocks it and it brings us new products. If you think about some of those bioindustrial things that I talked about, that's really more on that sustainability play of, how are we better with the resources we have on our planet? And then, where I'm most excited about the future going is the new unlocks, right? These molecules that will improve our health and wellness. And how do we get those to consumers broadly? Bring them to market in a way that's so cost effective that they're accessible for everyone.
There's so much to unpack there. I mean, there's a lot of exciting things. I want to talk about it all, but let's talk about from the beginning. Like, let's talk about the feedstock. You talked about your agricultural systems. When I'm thinking about Cargill, I'm thinking about corn, right? Is that the primary feedstock? I know I'm sure soybeans are a part of that. Can you give us a little bit of idea of
Sure.
what are some popular feedstocks and maybe some new ones that are being explored and you're thinking about?
So, from a Cargill perspective, corn is certainly our North American feedstock of choice, right? So, row crops have over the last, since the Borlaug Revolution, like the amount of efficiency that we get out of agricultural to grow row crops corn is tremendous. And so, we process a lot of corn and we actually convert corn into like 20 or 30 different products, right? So, every single element of the kernel of corn is used, everything from the germ to the corn oil to the starches, which then get broken down into the sugars that feed our fermentation. But that's a very North American, US centric view of feedstocks. If we think about Europe, in Europe, we're going to be talking more about wheat and getting the starches and things from wheat. Right now, we're really talking about a carbohydrate based feedstock system. If you start to talk about oils, then you're talking about things like sunflower and soybean. And then still on the carbohydrate train, if we go down to LATAM, Latin America and that region, you have more sugarcane as your influence in your feedstocks. And in certain regions in Asia Pacific, it's again, sucrose based feedstocks coming from sugarcane and other things. And so we in North America have a biorefinery model around our feedstocks and our feedstock utilization. So we have corn that comes in and we grind and process the corn and we, as I said, fractionate it and send it to all of its different potential outputs. And that corn going into starch, coming into simple sugars like dextrose, can get shuttled across our campus into 5 or 6 or 7 different types of fermentations. Some of those fermentations Cargill owns and operates, and some of them are co-location partners. So in Blair, we have, for example, Evonik is on site, Novonesis is on site, and they share with us. We provide them carbohydrates, we provide them electricity, we provide them wastewater support in some cases. It's this integrated model that allows us to scale effectively and reduce waste and be more efficient with energy utilization. Similar things are happening in Europe, right? If you look at, there's a relationship we have with this company called Enough, which is looking at mycoprotein. They're using that biorefinery concept to take advantages of some of the infrastructure that Cargill already has in place. So that's a little bit about feedstocks from a
Oh,
carbohydrate perspective. Cargill is also largely invested in oil processing. And so we do produce a lot of cooking oils and oils that go into other applications. Today, we are not running fermentations on those oils. It's an opportunity in the future, but we have a crop innovation team, and our crop innovation team is looking at new oil sources. And they have a relationship with the University of Minnesota, for example, to look at sustainable aviation fuels. And so when we think about technology in Cargill, it's not just microbial technology, it's crops as well, in that full integrated system.
I love it. I mean, I love talking
yeah.
about it. I know Carl has been going deep in the world of biomanufacturing and looking at not just the crops that are being grown for bioprocessing, but also crops that might be used for other things, but looking at the agricultural waste and using that as a feedstock. Has that been something that you've explored or?
It is, and it's something that we are continuously monitoring and participating in. There were, I would say, between like 2005 and 2015, 2000, in that time frame, cellulosics were really a point of interest in the United States, right? There was funding going towards looking at cellulosic supply chains and investing in it. Cargill had a position there also in the team that I'm part of. We had a fermentation organism that worked really well on C5 and C6 sugars. And so we had staked our position as being a technology provider into that space. There have been a lot of different changes in subsidies and political positioning around those types of cellulosic feedstocks, and that's has less momentum today than it used to. But over the last 2 to 3 years, I'm hearing it coming back up. There's a lot of complexity around those types of supply chains. But I think if we look at the way sequence availability and sequence space has expanded, and the access that we're going to have to new enzymes to help us manage and break down these products, I'm very optimistic about the space. I think it will come back again, and there will be new innovations in that space.
Yeah, I agree with you. We're very excited about that.
You hear about it in some sectors, like in our cocoa business. They get a lot of traction and a lot of reach outs from people who are looking at things like hulls and how do you upgrade hulls. And there are roles within Cargill where we do look at co-product streams or co-product valorization and see how we can do that. Internally, the first priority is our own streams, but often our customers will ask us, what could we do with our byproduct streams? And so that's an area of interest.
Nice,
Amazing.
nice.
So where do you see the most unexplored opportunities are at this intersection of food, systems, materials, and biology? I know it's a really broad question.
Yeah, where I want to see the most traction, because I think it will have a real lasting impact, is that turning nutritional science into everyday foods safely and at scale. Right. So there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of good nutrition science about different types of molecules. And there's a very active supplement space. Right. But most people don't want to get their lifestyle advantages from supplements. They want it to be part of their snacking. Right. They want it to
Yeah.
be part of their everyday food systems. And so I think those molecules are really interesting targets for biomanufacturing, right? Those small molecules or fibers, that seems like great biotech targets. The challenges there, like those bioactives, is getting them into the everyday products, right? How do we have enough funding and momentum and collaboration to do the right safety studies and clinical trials? How do we not lose the patients as we're going through those processes? How do we get through those regulatory hurdles so that they can be used in food? I mean, our food scientists in North America are just so creative and so amazing, right? You walk down the grocery store shelves, there's so much diversity. So I think if we can get these ingredients to a point where the food scientists can take them forward, that would change the story, right? So now you're going to be consuming your probiotics as a part of your everyday life. And it's not something that you have to think about at the end of the night when you're doing your evening routine or, carrying your little pill box with. It's just like,
I love that.
eat this in the car on the way to practice. That's where I'm excited. So making nutrition accessible and trusted through the food systems and not just in niche products.
Food is medicine, right? And this is the intersection of our work at Messaging Lab. We work with biopharma and then everything else that's biology. And it's so interesting to see. And I come from pharma, that's my background. And there's a lot of engineering and sometimes a bit over engineering of some molecules that are helpful, of course, but they're just like isolated as a one molecule. But we know biology is way more complex. It requires multiple molecules. You have vitamin C, but vitamin C is more effective with magnesium and other types of vitamins. So you have to have that mix. And coming from the healthcare world too, is that there's this issue of medication adherence, and even though taking supplements too, it's like I buy the supplements, I'll take it for 3 days, and then I'll forget about it. That's just my bad habit. I'm sure there's people that take supplements religiously, and that it also comes from this whole like movement of longevity. People are like, oh, what's your supplement stack? I just like to eat food, and I just want to make sure I would like to trust that our food system has those things, and it does have good things, but can it have more optimal things? And I think that's what you're talking about, and like I'm starting to see it. I'm sure you've seen a lot of these functional beverages like Olipop or Poppy, where they're prebiotic sodas. And I live in Brooklyn, New York, so it's a bubble, and I can't speak for the whole United States, so I don't know if this is what's happening around the country. But like a lot of like kids are now drinking Poppy, and like I am too. So I'd love to drink it. Like I don't drink Coca-Cola or Pepsi or anything like that, and we might be having them on the podcast, so I'm sorry. But like I think one of them did buy Poppy because it's a prebiotic, it's fiber, people are getting more fiber, that's what we need. And it just tastes great. In the end, it tastes great. It's bubbly, the cans are colorful, so the branding's really nice. And it's just a part of my life. I'm not like, oh, I need to eat fiber, so I'm going to drink a Poppy. It's like, no, I'm thirsty and I want something delicious. And okay, it has 5 grams of fiber in it. So wonderful.
And I think fiber is a great example, right? There's not just like one molecule that's fiber. There's a lot of design space, opportunity space. And if we can figure out ways to pair those like functionality studies and those proof points about how valuable these molecules are with quicker cycles of developing them, it's really exciting. As long as consumers come along with us, right?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, 100%. 100%.
There's so much opportunity there. Erin, thinking ahead over the next 5 or 10 years, what do you think success looks like for biotech's role inside global food and maybe materials?
Yeah, I would say success means that biotech isn't specialty. It's just a preferred engine for foods and materials, right? We just manufacture that way because there's a place for it. We need to see more investment in infrastructure. We need to see more products being proved out in the marketplace on delivering in their sustainability and performance promises. But I would love to see labels signaling preferred and not novel. Right? If you looked at the back of the pack and it said cultured X, Y, or Z, that you'd be like, that's the one that I want to buy. Fermented X, Y, or Z, that's the product for me. I think biotech is going to be embedded in our global supply chains. We need it to be trusted by consumers. And then we need to have it supported by proven economics and really proven sustainability. That's kind of how we move from like this promise that we're sitting at to being the backbone, right? Resilience, climate smart systems that prove out.
Yes, here. Excellent. I love it. You are the perfect person to speak with because you were talking about the going to the stores and seeing how everything is influenced and can be influenced by biotech. And here we're talking about growing everything. So wonderful, wonderful answer. Thank you so much for sharing that. But now it's time for the last segment, the fun segment, the quick fire questions. I can kick it off and then Carl and I will go back and forth. Let's get started. What's the most underrated part of the food system?
Food safety.
Wow. Yeah.
What's the food system change you wish would happen faster?
Acceptance of genetically modified organisms and gene editing.
Wow. Here we go. There we go.
Yes.
No frills. No, you're not wasting any time. Okay, great. Okay. Speaking of which, all right. The technology you're rooting for, but still skeptical of.
The enzymatic cascades to produce products. There's a couple of different ways of describing it, but it's really coupling together a series of isolated enzymes and feeding the cofactors and getting product without the little cell envelope and metabolism happening.
Let's break down enzymatic cascades, shall we? First, quick reminder. Enzymes are nature's tiny chemical machines. They're proteins that speed up very specific reactions. So, an enzymatic cascade is when those enzymes are lined up, each one doing a single transformation and then passing the molecule to the next until you get the product you desire. Instead of using a whole living cell, you're directing the chemistry step by step with biology. It's elegant, it's precise, and while it looks clean on paper, making it work at scale is actually pretty difficult.
Are you an optimist or realist when it comes to the future of food and biotech?
At my heart, I'm an optimist, but at work, I have to play a pragmatist. I'm an
Well
optimist.
said. Well said. Everyone at Cargill, the Cargill executives are very happy that you said that. The buzzword you'd happily retire forever.
Precision fermentation.
Oh, snap!
Yeah, and that's going to get me in trouble at the home office. But the challenge I have with it, my backup would be synthetic biology.
Oh.
Yeah, we would retire it too, or at least I would.
Yeah, same.
The challenge I have with both of them is the same thing, is it sounds nice, but I don't know what it means.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know. What does it mean? Like, where if you're making citric acid, is it imprecise? Or is there a certain amount of purity you have to have before you go into downstream processing to be precise? I just don't understand it. And I'm a little too reductionist to like let that flow. There's so many types of fermentation, right? And I think it makes it like, what about the ones that produce like 10 products? Like those are great organisms too. Like,
yeah.
Great answer. Okay, we'll have to dig into that some more and maybe do a fermentation episode to talk about the different types, and we can have you on to help. That would be really good. I think it'd help clarify and give people options. You know, they might be new to biotech. A lot of people are listening to this podcast from other industries that are passionate about biology, and they're starting to learn that this is a great tool. But even within biotech, there's so much nuance and there's different pathways, and one can be better for one product than the other. So thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. We're not holding back here on the podcast. We're going to say it like it is. Thank you so much, Erin, for coming on the podcast and sharing your perspective, telling us what's going on in the world of Cargill when it comes to biomanufacturing and fermentation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for what you do. I am so excited to be a part of this. I love that there are people out there who are talking about science, talking about technology, talking about fermentation. It's great. And I hope everybody listens to your podcast.
Oh,
we hope so too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.
Hey, this episode is sponsored by Messaging Lab. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling business narratives. And we have done so for the most successful biotech-forward companies across pharma, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice and elevate your business, visit us at messaginglab.com. Let's grow. So, Carl, what'd you think of that episode?
So Erin is an amazing person. Like you said at the beginning, everybody seems to know Erin, and I'm surprised we didn't have her on before, but she's the perfect person to kick off this series on CPG for us. And just the way that Erin talks about bringing everybody into this and understanding how central Cargill is, I think is really fascinating. One of the things I really loved that she mentioned was kind of imagining the grocery store aisles, aisle by aisle, and thinking about what products in an aisle could be biotech made or processed by biotech. I just love that.
Yeah, that is a beautiful way of thinking about it. Again, as I mentioned in the episode, it's just super aligned with what we think about here. I do the same thing. The way I do it, I'm thinking about it from who do we need to talk to? Who's out there? Who's already using biotech, which I'm sure she does too, but for someone in her position at a company that could really fundamentally change the way a lot of things are made because they have such broad reach and legacy and everything. It's very fascinating to see that, she gets out of the factory, out of the lab into the storefront and look at what's on the aisle and to think about it deeply from her lens is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and she also just kind of to drive that concept home, she said plasmids to pallets. And you like reacted very positively to her saying that. And that is really one of the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about. It's like, yeah, working in the lab is great, but what does it take to translate that lab discovery into pallets worth of products, pallets that are really going to impact a lot of people's lives? This is one of those, to me, one of those statements that I'm going to keep top and center. And I'm going to start asking people, how are you planning to move, from the lab into pallets?
Yeah, that is something we talked to a lot of innovators about. Erin gave a lot of great feedback and advice for innovators to work with companies like hers. And that also translates into other large companies too, right? To be thinking of, what's it like for Cargill to adopt that innovation, to put yourself and have the empathy to be thinking about how do you create win-win situations. And I also appreciated how she said, look, we're not just Luddites that are sitting in a lab, like
Right.
not like just doing one thing. Like they have lots of innovation happening at Cargill and these other big CPG companies, but they just can't go after it all. And we've seen companies, startups that, raise a lot of money, throw spaghetti at the wall and falter. We talked a lot about when we had Veronica Breckenridge on, and she talked about the Graveyard Report. Some of those companies kind of fell victim to that, going across the spectrum and trying to do a lot, right? There's a difference between taking some strategic multiple shots on goal and being very disciplined about that. But then there's another thing to be like, oh, this is a good idea. Let's just go for it and see what happens, right? And people will just come, right? You build it and it comes. So for someone like Erin, who works with the large companies, because those are Cargill's clients, and to be able to speak to all the innovators, she sits at this intersection where she can really unlock the challenge of these innovators to go from, a plasmid to the pallet for her clients, right? And so, we could probably have 2 or 3 more conversations with her. So Erin, if you're listening, we definitely want to have you back on in a few months or so, especially as, new things progress.
Yeah. And I think, what that really drives home, and something we've talked a lot about over the last year, is really this importance of collaboration. So you're a small company, you're very smart. Maybe you are thinking about how do you get out into the marketplace, and you really want to make that kind of impact. You really want to be producing at that pallet scale. How do you work with Cargill? Erin made it clear that she's very interested in talking to small companies and innovators, because that's something that they think about, and they don't do everything in-house. But you have to be able to think about how you're going to collaborate with a big company like that, which we know is challenging.
Yeah. Yes. It's easier said than done, but there's a method to the madness, I would say.
Exactly. Yeah. The last point I want to make about the conversation is, Erin pointed out that there's unexplored opportunities when it comes to safety at scale and using bioactives as targets for new products. And to me, what this spoke to is really this idea of non-catalytic proteins or peptides that have multiple uses. So a peptide that can be both a preservative, but also maybe, conveys a sweetness or a color to a product. And I think that means that there's really infinite opportunities once you start looking at bioactives that way. Erin nailed it on the head when she mentioned this. And I think it's just something that people who listen to this podcast should also be thinking about.
Right. Yes, exactly. And she's kicked off the CPG series, perfect person, like we've been saying, to really ground us and put us in this foundation, of course, not only from the Cargill value, right? They are creating these foundational products, the ingredients, the feedstocks, the supply chains, the global access, like they are the basis of a lot of the different products that we use today. And then we're going to continue. So our next episode is going to feature JC Garcia and Amy Trejo of P&G. And we're excited to talk to them about so many things. We do focus a lot on collaboration and how innovators can work with some of these large CPGs and what they need to take into consideration when it comes to approaching CPGs for partnership. So that's going to be a very exciting one. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah. So I think that's the pod. Please like and subscribe. Watch us on YouTube. We are on there. And actually, Spotify has our videos up too. And subscribe to our Substack and give us a shout out and let us know what you think about the episode.
Thanks so much. That's the pod.